So I created a new project, and I've added a map to it, and I've got this standard world topographic and world hillshade data. If I look at the map before I add any data, add its properties here, I can see that it automatically gets this WS84 World Mercator Auxiliary Sphere projection. It's a standard or default projection in there. That's the projection with the map surface. Now, the first time I add data, ARC does this funny thing. So I'm going to add this Albers data, and it shows the lower 48 of the US, and it lines up with the data that are there, but it changes the map projection here to that first data set I have, this Albert contiguous equal area conic. So it's projection commonly used for the lower 48 states, and it shows the projection there. So it takes that first data projection and it assigns it then for the map, and everything else I add afterwards gets reprojected into this projection, this map projection. So any data that are on the disk, if it has a different coordinate system, gets converted by ARC, reprojected on the fly to show up here on this map. So if I add some data that are in a Mercator projection, like these two city Mercator, or here this US 48 Mercator, so those are the lower 48 states, they're in a different projection, but they show up looking like the data on the Albers because they're reprojected to an Albers coordinate system. I'll illustrate this by inserting a new map. So here I have a new map, right? So this is called map 1, and maybe I'll just change the name here. So I'll right click and rename this as the Mercator map. And I'll go back to the first one, and I'll right click and rename it the Albers map. Okay, so here I am with the Mercator map, and it again does that default at the start, but then I'll go insert some data, and I'm going to add the Mercator data first. And when I add that Mercator data, you see it loads the lower 48, it matches the existing background, but the US 48, lower 48 has a different shape. Here there's this curved northern boundary there on the west between the US and Canada, and here it's flat because it's a different coordinate system. So the Mercator data have been assigned to this map as the base projection. The Mercator data have a Mercator projection, and it looks at that, ARC looks at that and says, okay, I'm going to make this map a Mercator map, and I'm going to basically reproject on the fly everything into it. So the Mercator data look like this in the Mercator map, and in this Albers map, they get reprojected on the fly. So this reproject on the fly is a useful thing. I can load data from different base projections without having to change them. So I can pull them off the disk, reproject them before I display them, and display them together. And that's great to have. You just got to be a little bit careful when you're doing some things like editing or some overlays. If the maps, the layers, I should say, are in different projections, they might not overlay correctly, or the data might be collected in one coordinate system when you think it's collected in another. So you just got to know that they do this on the fly projection. So remember, you can always go and look by right-clicking on the map here in the table of contents, not the data, but the map, and look at its properties. It'll tell you what the projection is. You go down and look at the coordinate system, and it gives you then the projection. I can also always check and see what a data's projection is by right-clicking on the data. And down here at the bottom, it's off screen, there's a properties option. And if I look down here in the source for the properties option, in the spatial reference, I see, oh, these data are in the World Mercator projection. It gives you a bunch of other information on the projection. I can do the same thing if I go over to the Albers map, and I'll go down here to the Albers data, and again, this properties selection is off the screen, and I can look then at the spatial reference, and it looks at the data on the disk, the data layer, and says, look, this is an Albers equal area conic projection, these data that have this set of parameters. So you can always query and find out what is the projection of a data layer, and that can be different from the projection of the map, and they can get projected on the fly from the datas to the maps. So this Mercator gets projected on the fly from a Mercator to an Albers. Doesn't change anything on the disk, but it displays it correctly in this map projection.